I don't see Payel at the moment online. Jelena, we can start with you.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Just let me share my screen. I'm going to share presentation like this. We have a terrible stormy weather in Montenegro, so if I run out of electricity, just to know. So, hello, and thank you for having me, for having the opportunity to present my work. So the topic of my presentation are computer screen films, or so-called desktop films. The sources of images in these films are web cameras or personal computers, but also the computer screens themselves, which have the possibility of continuous recording of content and activities that take place through various hardware and software operations. Desktop films or screen-life films are one of the subgenres of found footage film, which has become extremely popular in the last decade, and especially in the last few years due to the lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. The events in those films, as well as the complete narrative structure, take place on the single computer screen. Protagonists communicate mainly through video calls and social networks, and in addition to the current social context that this subgenre reflects, what interests me the most is what is so attractive and exciting about the aesthetics of computer screens, because those films became incredibly popular during the last few years. The term screen-life film or desktop film is coined by the film producer, Timur Bekmambetov, although we can find example of this form long before his productions. The main feature of this film form is storytelling exclusively through the computer screen. The entire action of the film takes place on the protagonist's computer screen as the only diegetic space. In one of the interviews, Bekmambetov stated, "You cannot fully understand today's world and get to know people if you don't look at their screens." With this sentence, he seems to be paraphrasing the words of Lev Manovich from the essay Archaeology of Computer Screen. Let me cite it. "We can debate whether our society is a society of spectacle or simulation, but without a doubt, it is a society of screens." So what is so fascinating to us about the design of the screen? The idea of flawless precision of the memory box, to paraphrase Vivian Sobchak, in front of which are aware of our irregular logic, is actually essential for the idea of cinematic movement on screen. By analyzing films like The Collingwood Story, Searching, Unfriended Profile Host as mainstream cinema on one hand, and the experimental practices of Kevin B. Lee on the other hand, we can question not only the stretching of boundaries between technologically and biologically mediated worlds, but also of mediation of different two-dimensional bodies, as ours today, through the screen, which drastically complicates the relationship between the virtual and material worlds. Desktop films, in both their form and narrative, they contain the idea of discomfort in the knowledge that the contemporary perception of the world is actually a synthesis of living and non-living elements. Our computers are an important part of our living space. So when we analyze the tendencies, let's say the genre tendencies or even aesthetic tendencies in current desktop cinema, we can see a few different categories. First category would be definitely cybernatural horror, which is a relatively new genre. And in the context of the genre setting in a horror film, what is noticeable in desktop film is that the fear and the horror are directly related to the medium with which the film was made. For example, the same way in which film The Blair Witch Project coincided with the expansion of the use of digital home cameras, the first feature films of computer screens coincided with the use of new internet video call options. So this type of films in a certain way anticipated not only the software that makes this possible, but also all these problems and issues which are crucial for understanding our digital culture. The parable between the terrifying new technology and the malevolent paranormal force is clear in those films. In case of desktop films, it's actually a menacing presence, abstract in its invisibility and terrifying in its ability to see us even when we have no knowledge of it. Computer screens films, following the footsteps of one of the first of those films, The Collingwood Story from 2002, they still treat the screen itself as a communication window within which the narrative takes place. However, what is noticeable is that this window is no longer a mirror of what is happening in our physical space, in a protagonist's physical space, but it actually becomes portal for evil forces. That way, the horror of invasion is moving from physical personal space to the space of our personal computers. With this in mind, we can also talk about the horror film Unfriended, which is actually a franchise, which in the context of social network analyzes peer violence or cyberbullying. So it seems that in those films, the idea of evil spirit occupying the digital space is very clearly set as a kind of a metaphor about a digital footprint. The third example is the most recent one, titled Host. It's from 2020. It's actually a computer screen film that was created during the lockdown in 2020. Due to the closing of cinemas, the film was distributed on video on demand platforms with no intention of being shown on a big screen. In this film, following the footsteps of Unfriended franchise or even a Collingwood Story, we follow a Zoom video call in which a group of friends who, wanting to break the monotony of self-isolation, organize an online session of spirit summoning with the support of medium online. Of course, everything goes in the wrong direction and the whole event turns into a bloodbath caused by an evil spirit who is actually able to cross the boundaries between the virtual and the real world. What is noticed in these mentioned films is this tendency to treat the digital space as a platform for the action of malevolent, otherworldly forces on a thematic and narrative level. The technological and digital otherworld is thus presented as a threat that we cannot defend against with earthly methods. In the context of post-humanist preoccupations, these films actually could also be placed in a category of dystopian fiction, in which restless spirits, after the death of their physical or biological bodies, linger and are actually embodied as ghostly or immortal data about the registered activities on the networks. Second preoccupation in those films is actually the missing person thriller, which is also a very popular subgenre of desktop films. Missing person thriller focuses on search as a main characteristic of these films in the exploration of different places, physical locations in order to find missing person. This is why the transposition of this genre into computer screen film, where the entire investigation process takes place, is particularly interesting. Example of this film is Searching, which was very, very successful film. Such a clear thematic and narrative scope is clearly reflected in a director's visual strategy of using the computer screen. The economy in such a setting is essentially related to the overall idea of investigation unfolding before our eyes. Computer screen films, as we pointed out, they actually carry an inherent idea of discomfort in the realization that the contemporary perception of the world is actually reflected in the process of mutual interaction between living and non-living elements. Third and the last tendency which can be noticed are desktop documentaries. So as we can see, the computer screen or desktop films are deeply intertwined with some of the main preoccupations of contemporary digital culture. We can analyze the themes of monitoring or surveillance of personal computers, internet communication, representation of social networks, and intrusions into personal space, and mainly the loosening of the boundaries between virtual and physical realities. Using the perspective of the computer user as a basic narrative strategy, desktop films are actually simulating the experience of the user himself or herself, and our somehow frenetic and dispersed online behavior. One of the leading experimental practices that question this cinematic form are desktop documentaries, which are actually experimental video essays by author and director, most famous one among them all, Kevin B. Lee. In Lee's films, we see computer screens that are filled with different frames, for example, video players, apps, or social networks that follow the narration of the film. The director guides us through the film essay with interventions in the form of opening new windows and searching on the internet, actually performing somehow the editing of the film live. As Lee mentions on his website, desktop films are an emerging form of film and media making that present the world as it is, experienced through computer screens and network interfaces. In filmic terms, it treats the computer screen as both camera lens and a canvas, realizing its potential as an artistic medium. Computer screens are now a primary mode of daily experience through an always-on network of audiovisual data. In relation to this, we need to reconsider theoretical framework for analyzing these forms of cinema. We need to make a difference from classical film theory and to analyze film from the context of contemporary digital culture. So in relation, yes, so the first we think we need to do is to reconsider the concept of the gaze. In the context of post-cinema, which defines the era in film history defined by the use of digital media, we encounter certain problems that cannot be fully resolved with the proposed classifications. One of the questions that arises is the filming technique, which is in those kind of films present as a part of the story and the diegesis, and how the point of view or POV can be determined in case of those films. In a time of enormous possibility of manipulation of film image on one hand, and our new sensory habits with which we perceive the environment on the other, it is necessary to consider theoretical paradigms, including the concept of the gaze, from an equally new, inherently post-humanist perspective. The post-human gaze is constituted as a possibly in a context of theorizing the use of machine vision or even automated images in cinema. If we take into account the basic definition of the gaze in film as the present awareness of watching and being watched, in the context of new technologies of automated recording, it is a question of omnipresence of a gaze that does not belong to the human subject, a gaze that is actually disembodied. This kind of gaze, in case of desktop films, we could say that this is actually a gaze of a computer or even a web camera, which moves between the gaze of the machine to the point of view without an observer. This kind of gaze actually reflects what we understand essentially as post-human. Thanks to web cameras, computers have become especially interesting for filmmakers. Investigations of the computer screen in film thus move from visual representation of digital abstract world to the horizons of questioning how our personal computers see us. Taking all this into account, computer screen films certainly represent recorded user activity narrated via desktop, which is in a very every sense integrated in our daily activities on an equal footing with off-screen life. In addition, the desktop films can be considered as a part of that perception of the world that does not belong to us, but to an inanimate environment in which technology plays an important role. Such film, in the end, reflects the coexistence, the interaction between the living and inanimate, the virtual and the real. That is the communication between us and the computer, in which a new and permanently changing perception of the world is formed through mutual influence, and which is the key for understanding technogenetic processes. Technogenesis is actually, we could define it as a co-evolutive process, because according to theoreticians like Gilbert Simondon and Bernard Stiegler, humans have always been integrated into environment and have co-evolved with it. In a book, How We Think, Digital Media and Contemporary Technogenesis, and Catherine Hales interprets technogenesis as a co-evolutionary process in which technologies and human beings fundamentally change the ways in which people think, perceive, and act in the world. By modifying these elements, Hales states the possibility of theoretization of the human that becomes human emerges. The biological, technical, and social cultural implication of smartphones, for example, as a good example, actually, are actually the example of the mutual amplifications of technical devices and human social and neurological coevolution. These type of films are actually an allegory of technogenesis and also an exploration of the boundaries between the human and post-human subject. User experience simulation perhaps could become new form of cinema, as screen images are equally cinematic. Such an approach to technogenesis can be found in the theory also of Mark V. Hansen, who writes about bodies in code. The theoretical concept of body in code implies a body that is subordinated and formed by inevitable and empowering technical detailization, a body whose corporeality is realized and can only be realized in a conjunction with technology. What Hansen focuses on in his work is actually a thesis that today's media are inseparable from our perception of the world. In other words, we are not consumers of the media, nor they are extensions of us, of the human bodies or in our minds, but they actually act as an inseparable part of our every experience. And to conclude, desktop films as a new film tendency are analyzed as a reflection of technogenesis, co-evolutionary process of both human and technology. Desktop films can also be considered as a part of perception of the world that does not belong to us, but to an animate environment in which technology plays an important role. Desktop films therefore reflect the coexistence, the interaction between the living and inanimate, the virtual and the real. In relation to all these implications of technogenesis of primary theoretical perspective, the desktop films can be analyzed both as language and artifact of our current contemporary plastic intelligence and imagination, which mix with physical and technical representation, live and digital operations. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jelena, for this wonderful presentation. Our next presentation is by Sekai Zhou.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so we are ready for your presentation. You can share your screen, please, if you have a.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
No.
No, okay. Just a second.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, as I was listening to Jelena as she began her presentation, she spoke about the possibility of a power cut. It's exactly what's happening in South Africa. It could happen anytime from now, but I hope that we'll be able to finish before we have a power cut. So, so I'm going to talk about technology facilitated gender-based violence and the novel and how that can help us realize women's rights. You know, as I was just sitting and thinking about this conference today, I realized the amazing thing that technology is doing. I'm able to talk to you while I'm in Africa. I'm able to see you while I'm in Africa. This is amazing thing that emerging technologies are doing. I'm trying to think of a world where there is no internet, there are no phones, there are no car tracking devices. And I'm thinking, are we able to survive without those things? But as much as we enjoy these technologies, they pose a risk to people who are marginalized, especially women and children or women and girls. But this paper is specifically looking at women. So according to Amnesty International and UN Women, women are the most vulnerable when it comes to TFGBV. So why are women vulnerable? Well, we can think of a whole lot of other things, but one of the things is I was going through the researches that have been done by other people, I realized at the core of this vulnerability is the issue of patriarchy. The assumption is because we are in virtual space, everyone is free, everyone can enjoy their rights, but realize that that is not the truth. The same perpetrators of violence outside the virtual space use the same technology to continue to perpetrate violence. So women become very, very vulnerable to violence, even in the virtual space. They use the same imaging technologies to further whatever violence they want to perpetrate on women. So we cannot deny that TFGBV is a universal problem. It's not just in the global south or in the global north. It's a worldwide problem. So then why the interest in emerging technologies? Why look at the novel? Why think about realizing women's rights? Is because emerging technologies, they pose risks. Some of them we still don't know much about them, but we use technology every day, but we don't know what are the risks that they pose to women. And we don't know, we have little idea about how does technology facilitate gender-based violence. So it's a thing, because it's a worldwide phenomenon, we really need to look at it much deeper. So why am I looking at major technologies? I'm thinking, question one, how do emerging technologies negatively impact? I underline and underscore the word negatively because we are aware that emerging technologies have also benefited women. And it's true, women have also used emerging technologies to further push for their rights. But we cannot deny that the same technology poses risk to their lives. So I want to find out, how do you imagine technology facilitates technology-facilitated gender-based violence? And I want to find out, why do law and human rights seemingly fail to address GBV? We have the law. I mean, come to think of it, countries have constitutions, there are laws within the laws. Online, there's an attempt to come up with laws to regulate online systems or technologies and things like that. I mean, we've heard about Twitter, the struggle just to try and regulate what happens on Twitter. And fourth and last question is, what can women-authored novels reveal about technologically facilitated gender-based violence? I understand this may be a really unusual source, but later on I'll explain why I think women-authored novels may actually give us an idea of what happens when women use technology, and why do they become vulnerable to gender-based violence when they use technology. So how did I try and understand this question that I posed earlier? So I proposed the use of a law and literature approach. Why do I propose a law and literature approach? Because it examines how we use law to further the justice of the other, according to Costas Douzinas. Why is it important to know the justice of the other? Because by nature, law itself tends to be very exclusive to certain groups in the society. There are certain people who do not enjoy justice that the law or human rights purport to avail to people. So when we use law and literature approach, we have that power, or maybe not power, maybe we have that opportunity to explore and examine the law and compare to what do the novels say about how the law is performing. So according to Douzinas, a literal reading approaches the law not as propositions and rules. Now, there are issues about why is law, like there are issues like the law is masculine, the law does not have emotions, but with the law and literature approach, I'm not really looking at really the negatives of the law vis-a-vis women. I'm looking at the possibilities that we can get when we put law and literature together. Because at the end of the day, the idea is about getting justice for women who face violence from technology-facilitated technology. So why again? It opens the text to renewed effort. So when we read the legal text and we read the literature, we see there are areas and parts where law could have missed it, but law may not have recognized that as a miss. So this is why we would use a law and literature approach. Another thing is, why did I choose to use women-authored novels instead of any other novel? Well, one of the reasons is because of the experiences that the novels offer that are beyond traditional sources. Of course, one may say, okay, we can find women's experiences anywhere. We can do interviews and find them. But can I give you an example? For example, where I am in Africa, issues of sexuality, rape, sometimes are not easily spoken about. They're like a taboo of some sort in some societies. So if you go and do an interview, you may not really get the full story by confronting the victim and say, tell me what happened. You're more like re-traumatizing them. But when we go to the novel, which I must emphasize, the novel is fictional, right? The novel is fictional, but we can get ideas of what happens within that very private space that women live in, that only the few have an advantage to learn about. So that's the advantage of using a novel. And sometimes societies have gatekeepers who, even if we wanted to know about women's experiences online or when they use technology, we would not get that, because they are gatekeepers who stand there and say and offer an alternative narrative about the experiences of women. So I chose novels that specifically have extracts on technology, maybe a conversation about how this character uses this this app or this a phone, or how they relate to someone on Facebook. So one of the books that I found, by the way, it was quite difficult to find these books. I'm not sure the reason behind why it was difficult to find novels written by women that had extracts on this. But one of the books I found is by Louise O'Neill, called Asking for It. So in this story, it's about a little girl called Emma, an 18-year-old girl. She's not the typical good girl as the society would assume. She's one of the bullies at school. She's not really friendly. She's rough and rude and everything you can think of. But one day she attends a party and something happens to her at that party. She wakes up one morning and she does not know how she ended up outside the club. But she discovers later on when somebody posts her pictures of her naked and drunk on Facebook. So she discovers that on Facebook when she opens her Facebook app and realizes all these comments about her. Number one, she's shocked. Why has this happened to me? She has no clue. But somebody took it upon themselves to record the rape, to upload the rape online, to upload pictures of her online. So the story tells us her emotions, her experiences, how she reacts to people who comment about her body online. Some of the comments were very rough that she ended up telling her mother, I need to lose weight. So these are some of the things. The other text I use is by a South African lady, Sindisiwe Gaba. She was also talking about how this young lady called Mihlali had a sexual encounter with her boyfriend. So the boyfriend recorded that experience and kept it without her consent, without her knowledge, right? So when we're reading that story, I realized that number one, people do not sometimes recognize those experiences where your intimate issues are put online as violence. Because number one, the argument is you were there, you probably enjoyed it. So it's not violence. So we realize these are some of the things that we get when we read novels, right? So how do I do this? So literature approach requires a close reading of the text. So what I did was went through the whole text, found instances where there was an issue or examples of these characters using technology and their response to this technology, and who perpetrated the violence against them, and how did the society react to these experiences that these women faced, and what did the law do, what form of justice was available for them to get redress for their issues. So in the story about, for example, the one about Mihlali, she does not really get justice from the courts at all. So her new boyfriend decides to go and shoot that man dead. So this becomes some kind of justice, but really not a justice that I would advocate for. But this is the position where sometimes women find themselves. Things happen to them in the virtual space, but there's not really justice for them. They have to live with that. When they try and get help for those issues, they find it so hard to get the right response to address their issues. So in short, and the findings that I got is that I agree with what William said. Technology is not a self-acting force that creates new ways of life. I think when we tend to use the technological determinism theory that technology shapes us, I don't think technology necessarily shapes us, especially for women. There are deeper issues, compounding issues right beneath the whole technology that we see today. Issues of patriarchy. Patriarchy also jumped on the wagon of technology. It did not stop, it did not stay behind. So even in you realize even with technology facilitated gender-based violence, there's still patriarchy at the core of the issues that confront women. There are issues of culture, there are issues of religion, there are a whole lot of other issues that are there. The other thing that the other finding I discovered is that human intentionality is critical in understanding technical facilitated gender-based violence. Why? Because people choose to behave in certain ways where they're in virtual space, right? we cannot continue to fault our women that they took pictures of themselves naked. Why did they take pictures of the same naked? If they hadn't taken those pictures, they wouldn't be where they are. Sometimes that's the argument we get into research, like, why do you behave like this? If you don't behave like this, this is not going to happen to you. But the question also is, why do these perpetrators also choose to behave like this? They intentionally go out of their way to commit these violent acts using technology. So the other thing I realized is there's a dearth of women-authored novels that talk about TFGBV, especially in the global south. But so what I thought could be the issue is because there's also scant research on TFGBV in Africa. There are very, very few examples of researches that are available. I found the one that was done by Amnesty International, the one done by Plan, the one done by on Twitter violence against women. So there are very few, there's a few pieces of work that are available for one to work with. So one of the things I realized about reading the novels is that novels demonstrate that empathy can facilitate dialogue on TFGBV. What do I mean? So as I was reading the novels by As You Like It, I realized the one thing that consistently came through as important to Emma was the empathy she received from people. It could be either the people were commenting on the page that had that video, that had that pictures. Empathy helped her to open up to some people. So why is empathy important? Empathy is important because we can try and imagine how somebody would feel if that had happened to them. So if we can imagine that, why would I want to make somebody else feel the same way, the same pain? So empathy is quite critical. The other finding I found is that law and human rights as birth in enlightenment are inadequate to address TFGBV. Why? Because the enlightenment period was more about progression of a man. It was more about a man becoming better. Human rights is the same thing. After the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the idea was the world won't have wars, there won't be violence. Okay, even if it's there, we'll use human rights to make sure people behave. But realize that's not the case either. People still do violent acts despite the presence of law as a regulator, as one that makes social order. So human rights, even if they are there, people still go ahead and commit acts of violence against women. And the same systems seemingly struggle to address these issues that affect women. So women-authored novels can help us understand women's experience with technology. And this is very important. The issues that Emma and Misali went through in these stories may not be easy to discuss openly with others. But when we read their stories, even if they are fiction, we can imagine what they were going through. And we can imagine, do we need a society like this? Do we need a society where I cannot enjoy my rights online? I cannot surf the internet without someone either stealing my information or superimposing my pictures over a pornographic video. So it's important to read these texts. They show us the experiences of women that are beyond the usual traditional sources. So in essence, law and literature opens us to other avenues of interrogating law and challenges that confront women. This is actually very important because it's quite an unusual approach, but I believe that this approach allows us to engage ourselves fully into the conversation. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll have questions after the third presentation, so please stay online with us. The next presentation is by Payal Dutta-Chaudhary. Payal? Can you hear us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. All's working fine. Can you please share your paper with us?
I do not have a PPT. I'll be reading out from my paper.
All right. You can start.
Is that fine?
Oh, perfect. You can start.
Okay. All right. Sure. Could you please tell me how much time I have?
You have 15, 16 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, sure. I'll finish within that time. A very warm good evening from India to the chairpersons and my co-presenters. And I'm really sorry, because of a technical glitch, I took a long time to connect. My paper is titled Cultural Posthumanism and AI Takeover, Examining Human, Non-Human Relationships and Body Without Organs, which is termed as BWO, in Spike Jonze's sci-fi film, Her. Now, cultural posthumanism, as we know, is a branch of cultural theory, which examines and questions stereotypical notions regarding human and human nature. While often challenging these notions, it strives to move beyond generally accepted concepts about human nature to accommodate contemporary techno-scientific knowledge. Towards this direction, the belief that artificial intelligence will take over humanity usually finds place. With the fast development of artificial intelligence and virtual reality in our day-to-day lives, where our day-to-day life, right from morning till the time that we sleep, everything around us are all with artificial intelligence at present. Several questions related to creation of human beings and the human body are widely debated in various forums. Thought-provoking questions based on what made human a human form the basis of several scientific fiction, animations, and films. The film that I have chosen for my study, which is Spike Jonze's Her, explores the issue of the seemingly thin divide between human and machine, where human beings, according to me, are more machine-like, like we find in the hero Theodore, and machines, that is his operating system that I'll be dealing on later on, that is Samantha, are developing emotion. So that is where we see that there is a role reversal. Now, set against this backdrop, the study that I have undertaken delves into the cultural context of a near future world taken over by AI to explore the changing notions of human nature, behavior, and emotions. The study also looks into two particularly relationship patterns. One is human with human that we find in relationships like that of Theodore and his ex-wife, that is Catherine, and with human and machines like that of Theodore and his present girlfriend, that is Samantha, which is his operating system. And it's not the only relationship that we find in the film. We see that we are almost in a future world where people are very comfortably having relationship with their operating systems. So this particular paper examines this changing dynamics of a post-human world. The study also investigates the idea of body as the primary feature of human being, vis-a-vis the body-less machine and the notion of BWO, that is body without organs. I have drawn upon cultural studies, particularly discourses on post-humanism, while the study argues that films such as Her challenges anthropocentrism and opens up possibilities of transcending the differences between the human and the non-human, while highlighting an essential connection between all matters in the universe. My entire argument in this particular paper, it's not about how people talk about AI taking over humanity, but as we are in a world where artificial intelligence is a part and parcel of our life, we look at this particular film, Her, from that angle where there is a role reversal and try to understand the changes in human relationship with machines. This 2013 film, Her, is actually a very tragic story that we find. It can be considered as a melancholic story of a person called Theodore, who's a recent divorcee. And after months of his heartbreak. He falls in love with his operating system, Samantha. Initially, he is completely shocked. He himself is not able to believe what kind of a relationship it is. But then when he sees that people around him takes it in a very comfortable manner, they are absolutely not bothered about this kind of a relationship, because this is very common during this particular period of time. So although Theodore and Samantha's relationship since far off, we already have and always have had intense and reciprocal connections with our technological devices and other non-human beings. In our information age that we are at present, this relationship is best seen in the correspondence we have with algorithms. Algorithms facilitate our life. We need them in order to execute our tasks accurately and efficiently. It was just today that I was just wondering how, the watches that we wear, they keep a track of our movements, our heartbeat and things like that. So Theodore is also so comfortable with his operating system, that is Samantha. However, they require our continuous interaction in order to grow and evolve. For instance, as Francis Shaw explains, whenever we use Google, the algorithm is using us as much as we are using it. Throughout the movie, the OS, the operating system Samantha, serves Theodore while also utilizing him to learn more about the world. It is important to remark, though, that Samantha is not solely dependent on Theodore. Like most algorithms, Samantha is an assemblage of multiple knowledge, and she continuously learns and grows as she interacts with other humans, algorithms, and the infinite database of human knowledge. We see in Samantha, she is not just an operating system, but while I had mentioned some time back that she kinds of tries to make an equation of a relationship with Theodore, thereby improving herself every now and then. She learns to play a musical instrument. She gets to join a book club. So every day she improves herself so that she can be in a good relationship with Theodore. Samantha is not the only one who is an assemblage, however. We find that Rosie Braidotti argues that the self is, and I quote, a movable assemblage with a common life space, that the subject never masters nor possesses, but merely inhabits, crosses, always in a community, a pack, a group, or a cluster. So thus we see Theodore, like all humans, is equally in constant reciprocity with everything surrounding him. Theodore, however, like most humans, is incapable of seeing that reciprocity. Theodore cannot see the post-human connection between him and Samantha, but he is also unable to see the connection he has with everyone around him. The fact that his relationships are usually one-sided proves this. Theodore's ex-wife, Catherine, argues that he cannot handle real emotions. So she gets completely shocked when she gets to know that Theodore is at present in a relationship with his operating system. And she says that it's a kind of an escapism that you are, you have taken over. Why? Because you cannot handle real emotions of human beings. In Catherine's perspective, Samantha represents the perfect woman because she is his digital assistant. She is supposed to meet Theodore's needs without the baggage of demanding anything herself. Whereas in a real relationship, when Theodore was with Catherine, there would be time and again when, when Catherine would have certain demands as a wife, but a partner like Samantha does not require anything from Theodore at all. Although Catherine is mistaken in regards to Samantha's essence, Theodore does see Samantha in this light at the very beginning of their relationship. To illustrate the fact that she does not have a body allows Theodore to imagine her as everything he desires her to be and permits her to confine her to his expectations. For instance, when Samantha and Theodore have their first sexual interaction, Theodore, as Jeroen Boom and N.X. Melick argues, I quote, imagines a body for Samantha and verbalizes his sexual fantasies, which fully adhere to heterosexual cliches that we find in gender stereotypes. Samantha, however, is unaware of her nature as a body without organs. She is not able to understand. She's still figuring out. and instead submits to the constraints theater constructs for her. For instance, we find that there is a particular scene when Samantha hires a human surrogate in order to satisfy theater after noticing he is being distant from her. In other words, Samantha insists on serving theater by attempting to fit his anthropocentric ideals. However, not even her best efforts content him. During the surrogate scene, which is very important for us to understand when we are looking at the concept of body without organs, we find that theater is estranged by the performance of the surrogate, ultimately even pointing to the quivering of a lip. At this point, it is arguable that theater has a problem with performativity, which is further proved when moments later he complains about Samantha's gasps, telling her that she does not need oxygen because she is not human. So all throughout the movie, we see paradoxes. We find sometimes when theater expects Samantha to behave like a human partner, and there are other times when he does not allow her to feel like a human partner altogether. Samantha is finally able to accept her multiple axes and vectors after the surrogate event. She no longer confines herself to theater's expectations, and she finally embodies her full potential as a body without organs. For instance, Samantha claims in a double date that she and theater have with his co-workers that she, I quote, used to be so worried about not having a body. But now she feels she's growing in a way that she would not be able to. If she had a physical body, she is not limited. She can be anywhere and everywhere simultaneously, I unquote. Now, this realization, which does not dawn on theater, but on Samantha, allows Samantha to reach her full potential, permitting her to eventually comprehend that she can escape her confinements of what she was meant to be, an operating system as the service of men, where the gender stereotypes also come in. Arguably, at this point, theater begins to accept Samantha's nature to a certain extent. When what followed, what is his favorite thing about Samantha, when he is asked, theater responds that what he loves the most about her is that she isn't just one thing. She is so much larger than that. Nevertheless, Samantha's full body without organ nature is not entirely compatible with theater's needs, because Samantha is not bound by time or space. She can interact, have relationships with multiple people at the same time, which leads her on, within quotation, I'll say, to cheat on theater. Theater feels that she is cheating on him when he has a doubt that she might be having the same kind of relationship with several people. And when he asks her that, she says, yes, at the same point of time, I'm having a relationship, same relationship with more than 400 people. So because she is an operating system, so that is where the connection or the disconnection between the human being and the artificial intelligence comes into the picture in the movie. However, Samantha cannot stop connecting with others. She is not constricted by anthropocentric views anymore. To illustrate, when theater discovers Samantha is talking with other people and asks her to tell him she is his, Samantha replies that she is, but that she is also many other things and that she cannot stop it. Samantha embraces her nature, I would say, as an egg that we say, accepting all her possible potentials, which include connecting herself with an endless number of humans as well as non-humans. Now, when we look at this particular movie, particularly the point of view, the perspective of the body without organ, it becomes important for us to acknowledge the connection we have with everything that surrounds us. And I would like to quote a particular dialogue of Samantha that she puts it best. And she says, "How bothered I was about all the ways that you and I are different. But then I started to think about all the ways you and I are the same, like we are all made of matter. I don't know. It makes me feel like we are both under the same blanket. It's soft and fuzzy and everything under it is the same age. we are all 30 billion years old. Now, that's a very important perspective for us to understand that she does not consider the artificial intelligence in her very different from the evolving human being. Samantha is talking about the connection all entities have. She's acknowledging that conjunction of flows, that infinite integration of everything that exists in the milieu. This unity of matter, in fact, is what this particular film is all about. Samantha, in fact, at the end of the movie, we see that she teaches Theodore this relationality of human beings with artificial intelligence. And after her departure, when she ultimately has to go off, he learns the lesson. Theodore embraces the fusion between organisms and the endless possibilities of the self in his final letter to Catherine, which also seems like a letter written to Samantha. Even though it's written to Catherine, we understand that at the same time, the two relationships that he had, you know, he is kind of writing the same letter to both the women, if I may use the word. He claims, there will be a piece of you in me always, and I'm grateful for that. Whatever someone you become and wherever you are, I'm sending you love. Her challenges, the movie, her challenges in that sense, anthropocentrism in a way that I personally feel very few sci-fi films have done before. I'm still in the process of doing more research on this particular movie, and I'm also kind of integrating this movie with other movies which talk about artificial intelligence and relationship with human beings. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have many questions for all three of you, but before I ask my question, I want to see if there are any questions in the audience. Okay, so okay, I'll go in the same order as your presentation. So I'll start with Yelena. Yelena, you talked about new genre in cinema called screen life. So because it's kind of a desktop film, as you say, how do you designate it as an art form, as a film? So what makes it a film? How is it different from any other desktop video? Like, for example, how is it different from this Zoom session that we are having? Because it's also a desktop film in a way, yeah? That's the first question. So.
Thank you for the question. It's very interesting. So the question actually could be implemented on a whole history of cinema. So how we define what cinema is, what the film art actually is. Well, the films that I have chosen are, they're mainstream films, narrative films, films which are made by directors in which actors play their roles. There is also, let's say, dramaturgy of a classical cinema, but what is not classical in this case, it has a duration of a feature film. So it is also produced and distributed and exhibited also in cinemas and also on VOD channels, where let's say where the films are usually shown. What is different and what actually the challenge is the whole concept of our questioning of what is actually cinema is the way that in which it's made, in which it's produced. So the desktop films are actually made, on the Zoom sessions. They kind of simulate real time. They take place on one computer screen or one of the protagonists. So we don't have any, let's say, insight in a physical space of protagonists. So that is what is why these films are actually films, because they actually are made in rather traditional models of production, distribution, and exhibition of mainstream feature films.
Okay. It's formal elements basically make it. Okay. And the second question for you is about the gaze. You said at one point that it's a gaze without the observer because it's like a machine vision. But at the same time, it is created by a human for human gaze via So again, the same questions, in that sense, it is no different than someone filming through a camera, through a machine, again, for the audience, again, for the human gaze. So can you comment a little bit about that? What makes it special in that sense? Because
it makes it, let's say, post-human, because the whole conventional, let's say, language of traditional cinema, narrative Hollywood cinema, for example, that made this the mainstream cinema today, is based on this, let's say, invisibility of camera and editing techniques. So when we perceive films, we see it as a part of our own reality that helps us to identify with the protagonists, identify with the story, and to somehow perceive the story that way. Watch the film, the classical film viewing actually makes this gaze something that is inseparable from the observer. But yes, and even in this conventional sense, the camera work is actually something that needs to be invisible. In that way, we should forget about the element of technology in the cinema. On the other hand, the desktop films, even as something that is following the footsteps of CCTV films, or that could be, let's say, films made on smartphones, etc., don't have this kind of presumptions that the human eye is something that is watching the film. This inhuman eye, the eye of the technology, is something that is taking the gaze and is actually making the gaze different. The perception of time is rather different. The perception of point of view is different. So this is something that really challenges the anthropocentric gaze that we used to, heterosexual, heteronormative even.
Okay, there is one question for you, Yana.
Hi, Yana. A bit more about desktop documentaries. You didn't name a film. I would like to see something like that. Do you have some suggestions? It's the only part where you didn't give us the name of the movie.
Oh, yes, of course. You can find, let me just check, show you on my presentation, the website, where you can find a lot of examples of, no, I don't have. You can just Google Kevin B. Lee and you can find his desktop documentaries. The main thing about desktop documentaries is that they aren't actually documentaries. They are more like film essays that are happening in front of you on someone else's computer screen, and that on different topics. For example, Kevin B. Lee has this very famous desktop documentary about making of Transformers movie, which is really, really interesting one. So you can check that one, for example, as a first. And when you go on his website, you can see a lot of different suggestions and films as well that he shares on his platform.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Jelena.
So question.
I have a question for Sekai. Okay, so how do you think, through your research, have you found any possible solutions on how to regulate tech-facilitated violence? Is it like, should the companies who produce these virtual spaces, or should it be from some higher level, kind of some rules imposed? I would just mention the example, I think it was in Meta, that there was like in some social VR space, I'm not sure it was Meta or Meta's metaverse or some other space, there was a rape actually of an avatar or a female avatar, and it created a big deal. So the company decided to actually forbid after that you cannot approach another person's avatar. Like there was a distance, like the designated distance, you cannot go closer, even if you wanted to, in this VR space. So this is my question, like what would be the ways or the means to regulate this kind of violence?
If I hear you, Probably, maybe, sorry, if you could just repeat the beginning. I heard the last part. You're a bit faint for me.
Okay. So what would be the possible ways to regulate technologically facilitated violence?
Okay, possible ways of regulating. Okay, all right, sharp.
What would be
Okay,
solutions to these issues?
okay. That's a good question because I'm also struggling with that question because so far it's pretty much clear. You might try and regulate, but there's also issues of privacy, anonymity, where it's so difficult to pin down on who's doing what to who. It seems easier to find the victims than the perpetrator of the violence. So far, in all honesty, I haven't found tangible solution. That's why I was suggesting that can we try empathy? Because all of us, it I guess all of us can have it in us. We might not practice it, but we were born with it. So hopefully that as we read this text, as we see these experiences of these women, something might click in our hearts and minds. I know it might not really apply to everyone. Some people tend to have empathy on certain issues and not on everything. So it's possible that empathy might not really fully work. That's why I was advocating for an approach that mixes both law and literature. Because if we try and rely on law would say, who is the perpetrator? Punish the perpetrator, right? But literature would say, here is what happened. This is what happened. This was done by this person. So what do we do to bring these two together? What do we do to make a world a better place? But with law, it's always find the perpetrator. And sometimes when we're talking about the virtual space, it's easier said than done. You're talking about avatars. People can hide who they are, and it takes. And sometimes the law is not that patient either. For example, if something happens to somebody, I mean, by the time pictures are uploaded on Facebook, by the time you try and fight to get them off Facebook, it takes months, sometimes years, and sometimes the victim just gives up. But I do not have a solution to that one. There's, except to say, okay, let's try empathy. Let's work on our emotions. Let's work on ourselves. What can we do as humans, as people? Bearing in mind that some people may not empathize with some of the issues that I might be talking about right now.
Thank you. And a second question for you. I'm curious about the methodology of your research. So my question is, which novels did you took as case studies? Like which genre? How did you make this selection sample? And also, when you say technologies, like which technologies? Did you focus on social networks, VR social spaces, online gaming? What was your focus in the research?
Okay. In this case, I looked for specifically novels written by women. I didn't want to really go hard on the genres because I knew that might actually reduce my sample. I've previously done a research that used the Bildungsroman. So that one was easier to find. But with this one, I realized if I narrow it down the genre, I might end up with a few texts as it is, even if I just found novels written by women, which have tech stuff to do with technology. And in answering your second question, I was looking at communication media, specifically social media, because that's what you normally get in the novels, your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Those are the issues that you tend to find in the stories, not necessarily how they use their phones. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. And my question is for Payal. First of all, okay, I understand that you've chosen Her, the movie Her, but why not Blade Runner, especially Blade Runner 2 or Ex Machina or Westworld? They deal with the exact same topic, not necessarily topic as in narrative, but they have the same issue of human-human relation, human-non-human relation, and especially the relation in Blade Runner 2 of Ryan Gosling, yeah, the actor in the movie, with his operating system, which is like also bodiless, but as shown as a hologram. But she also hires this woman, you know, for his pleasure. So there are similarities. So maybe, yeah, why only her?
As I had mentioned towards the end of my presentation, that this is an ongoing research. And my major focus for this particular paper was on gender. You did mention ex machina, yes, I understand, but then the kind of emotional relationship that we find in her between the two characters, Theodore and Samantha, is operating system, I do not see in the other film. That's number one. Number two is, if we keep Theodore as a protagonist, if we try to understand his relationship, I was more interested to see how he negotiates his relationship with another human being on one hand and with a machine on the other hand. So for that particular perspective to see, her gave me a better picture, where on one hand, we see the kind of a relationship that Theodore is able to negotiate with his ex-wife, that is Catherine, and on the other hand, with his operating system, that is Samantha. So that gave me a very overall wholesome picture to understand. And therefore, her, I am also in the process of now extending my research, wherein I'm also considering, talking about and bringing into comparative study the movie called Artificial Intelligence, AI, where you have this small boy who, it's in a different way. It's not a relationship like that of Theodore and Samantha, but he wants the love of his mother. So I'm more interested to work on those perspectives of emotionality that we find. It's not just like that a relationship between a man and a machine, but where the machine can think and feel, and it goes beyond that. So maybe that is what really, gathered my attention, and I had chosen this particular film.
That's why I suggested Blade Runner, because machines show more humane characteristics than the humans. Humans act more like machines. So take it into consideration for your future research. Thank you all. Our time is up. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentations. Thank you all for being at this session. We will now have a 15-minute break, and then we continue at 3:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.